award-winning writer, poet, and the editor-in-chief of Granta. Aminatta is an award-winning novelist and the author of Bruna, which is one of my favorite stories in this collection. I couldn't wait to get my hands on this book. I think I started hearing about it in, sometime in the spring, and I couldn't wait to get my hands on it. And I couldn't wait because it tackles two issues that are really important to me that I've really been digging deeper into, which is environmentalism and social justice. And I love that this book uses storytelling to explore our sentiments towards climate change. I mean, with so much vitriol and political posturing around this topic, it was just really great to have the chance to be a bit of a voyeur and to learn more about these issues through the lives of everyday people. And it really puts a human face on climate change, which often it gets obscured by scientific jargon and partisan ideology. And I think it allows and forces the reader to open their eyes to different approaches to this complex issue. And I know that I've been working with my own team to work on a more sustainable platform myself, and your book has certainly made me gauge my own participation and perspective on how much, or rather how little, I actually know about this subject. So what was the catalyst that drove you to want to focus on inequality and tell stories about these vulnerable communities?
I started to put together this book on the back of publishing Tales of Two Americas, which was about inequality in the United States. And as I traveled the country then, I began to go to communities where people couldn't rebuild their houses after storms because it was no longer a safe place to do so. I went to states and cities where migration as a result of environmental disasters in Central America had changed the population and had changed the political discourse in this country as a result of migration being seen not as an enlarging force for American life, but a threat to American life, which is, I think, a dangerous moment. And as I took the book around the world, it was published in a few countries, I noticed that these issues were not exclusive at all to America. They were, in fact, being experienced everywhere. And of course, doing just a tiny bit of research, I realized that the United States is actually in far better shape than the rest of the world when it comes to the climate crisis. Not in the policies that we're prosecuting in our government, but rather that climate change has arrived a long time ago to many parts of the globe, especially in Southeast Asia and places like Bangladesh, and in some countries in sub-Saharan Africa. And I thought, if we don't start to engage with each other around the world to figure out what we're all going through simultaneously, it will seem like climate change is always coming from over there to us, when in fact we're all knitted together in this very complex global ecosystem. So I wonder if you found some similarities in the attitude towards, that notion of dominion over nature.
Yeah. Well, hello everybody. I got very interested in the interconnection between humans and four and two-legged animals anyway. Actually, first of all, in London, where I had foxes in my garden all year round, and I would watch the local vixen, our resident vixen, bringing up her cubs. And then I moved to the States, and I had coyote. I was living in Western Massachusetts, and I had coyote there. But there were also, some bears and deer and all kinds of things. And now I live in Virginia, just outside Washington, D.C. And here I have deer, a lot, foxes, and at least one coyote. And I became really interested in how we are failing to share the world with other animals, particularly, it seems to me, animals whose spaces we have chosen to occupy. So, what happened in Sierra Leone and what the story Bruno was about was really our issue there in terms of in the environment and climate change is really deforestation on a massive scale, and also the looting of resources, or So actually, when everyone talks about isolationism, you know, this is a political fantasy. I mean, you know, the West needs the resources of most of Africa. You know, China needs the land, or wants the land. People want the iron ore, they want the diamonds, they want the gold, they want the oil. You know, there is no isolationism, right? So what was happening in Sierra Leone was this massive deforestation, and also the activity of the miners, and it was taking away the land from the ape population. The population was getting squeezed into smaller and smaller patches of land. But also at the same time, the attitude towards apes had changed. And this is one of the things that I'm so interested in is the activity of religion in all of this. That in the past, in fact, in the not so distant past, people in Sierra Leone purported to believe that apes were formerly human and they'd been punished by the gods for breaking the rules of the forest, right, for fishing out of season. Now, all of these things, actually, if you look at the local religions, they're all about conservation, right? They're all about conservation. So the story goes, this is what they tell children, that, you know, a chimp is a human who broke the rules, who fished out of season and was turned by the gods into an ape. That changed with the war, but it changed with Christianity, and people began to hunt and capture apes. And I'll probably reserve the story of Bruno's escape for a little later in the show, but Bruno, who the story is all about, was an ape that was captured. His mother was killed and he was sold to a man who thought he would keep him as a pet and realized that actually keeping a chimpanzee as a pet is probably one of the bigger mistakes you can make in your life. But through that era, you know, he became persuaded into the path of conservation, and he set up an ape rescue.
How do you feel that we can navigate these different needs within communities and cultural values to address the facets of climate change?
Well, I mean, the big problem in Sierra Leone isn't really what the local people are doing. It's actually what outsiders are doing. So the fishing rights off the coast have been completely devastated by the fact that they're huge trawlers owned by the Japanese and the European Union, just lifting, you know, millions of tons of fish out of the sea so that the local fishermen can't feed their families. You know, around the area where my family live, I mean, I have a project, a farming project, but the project actually began to try to stop a huge Chinese-run sugar plantation that was just buying up hundreds and thousands of hectares and dispossessing all the farmers. So actually, I don't really, you know, I mean, people in Sierra Leone are not perfect by any means, but, you know, to me, this is an international problem. It's not a local problem. I mean, it has become a local problem, but it's an international problem. And so I can't see a solution that doesn't involve an international consensus, right? There's almost nothing one of those farmers in Sierra Leone can do. I mean, they did it all, you know, they lay down in front of the bulldozers. Sure. You know, they got me involved. I did everything I could. You know, the fishermen have tried everything they can, but these are small, these are little people fighting giants, and nothing is going to happen without a consensus on a major political level.
Has working on this book for either of you changed any of your own habits? I know we've talked mainly it's a larger force at work, but did you find that with writing this book that you had a different perspective, or you changed any habits in your daily life? Or
so many years ago, I took a journey in a taxi cab from the Sydney Literature Festival to the airport. And I was traveling with an environmentalist, an Australian environmentalist, and he told me a story that stayed with me so thoroughly and so deeply, and it has since come back into my you know, into the sort of panoply of stories that make you think about the person that you are and the person that you want to be. And he told me that he had left the Sydney suburbs and he had taken his family with him, and they had gone to live. He'd bought a blueberry farm in Tasmania, and he'd moved his children there. And so the reason for this was because he believed that there was a great environmental disaster coming, and he couldn't tell when, but he wanted his children to live closer, to know more about the land, right? To be capable of living more closely to the land. He wasn't turning them all into farmers, and he wasn't putting them out of school, but he was just trying to make them a more practically minded kids. And, you know, I began to work on, you know, I was writing the story of Bruno, and Tales of Two Planets came out, and I've read a lot of the work in it. And, you know, I began to think very closely about, you know, what would my next focus be? I mean, I've spent 20 years writing about war, and I feel like I've come to the end of that. So, and if one ever comes to the end of war, but I have.
Well, this is a separate kind of war, you could argue.
Yeah, exactly. And, you know, because I do see writing as a moral enterprise for me, you know, and not for everybody. I know some people write for entertainment, but for me, it's a moral enterprise. So I really began to think about what is what is the moral enterprise that most concerns me, and it is the environment. And with this, so bringing these two thoughts together, you know, Bruno, the communities that I knew through Sierra Leone, through the work that I've done there in terms of the land, trying to protect the land, I really began to think about what the story this environmentalist had told me. Now, the story is this, that the coming catastrophe would be prompted by a number of things. And some of the key elements were a political political crisis, an economic crisis, and an environmental crisis. And the environmental crisis, I think when he was talking to me, I supposed would be something like an earthquake or a tsunami, but actually it could equally be a pandemic.
Going forward as a writer, you almost want to think about, can we see the world without ourselves as humans at the center of it? And what would that mean, and what would that look like? And how would you tell stories in which maybe even a human being wasn't at the center of the story? And so, you know, the piece that you mentioned is written by an American short story writer named Joy Williams, who, if you haven't read a short story in a while and you love Flannery O'Connor and you kind of like that scorched earth attitude towards what a short story can do, Joy Williams is your woman. And she lives between Laramie, Wyoming, and Tucson. And so she spends a lot of time around people that own guns, who hunt. But what she really has no patience for is the big game wildlife hunters that collect trophies. And she describes some of the clubs and the games that they participate in, and how almost psychopathic it is to look at something that's so beautiful and so rare, sometimes endangered, and think, I'd really love to kill that.
Right.
And so I think one of the things that this book highlights is an attitude towards who and what has an entitlement to life and what life means. You know, because across this book there are people without running water, and then there are people in other stories with quite a lot of things. And it's not an indictment, say, of the people with a lot of things, but how do we live in a world which has those disparities, and what kind of moral compasses are we using, and how do we remind ourselves without beating ourselves up, if we live in a culture like the US in relative comfort, how do we engage with those realities? And to me, it's about reading stories and constantly trying to find ways to enlarge our frame of reference. And that's one of the reasons why, Aminatta has been such an important writer to me personally. And it's been such a pleasure to work with her, because with each book, she's expanded and tilted the world that I've looked at, in ways that doesn't also forget that it's fun to have pleasure while reading and to laugh,
Mm-hmm.
you know. So I think it's possible to do all this and to find humor in it. And if it's a black humor, you know, a sort of dark humor, that's fine too.
That was what was so great, is that I felt like you got the whole colors, the whole rainbow of emotions throughout the book, from the anger in Joy's work. I forget the name of it off the top of my head, but you know, the aggression and anger, and I felt that, and I agree with her, and I feel I shout at my TV every time I see politicians with, you know, with their kills. To having humor with the funniest shit you've ever heard, I think is the story. And these are heavy topics, and I think that's what makes this book so wonderful, is to approach it with so many different tones. Because if you're just approach it with one sort of direction, maybe you're not going to win someone over in the same way you would with humor, with aggression or anger, what have you. So I think
And there could even be wonder. I mean,
sure.
One of my favorite pieces is Aminatta Roy's piece about that clock tower in a Himalayan town that gets buried because a dam is built and the town is flooded, and the clock tower continues to ring from underneath a new, you know, man-made lake. And it feels like a metaphor for what we all know is sort of coming. And, you know, and similarly in Aminatta's piece about Bruno, there are sections of it which are just exquisitely beautiful. And then of course it's kind of funny because Bruno becomes like a Sierra Leonean Spartacus. Like people start cheering him on.
Okay, so question: climate change or crisis, as in Storytellers of the Earth, is exigent right now. What do you think it will take to get others to wake up? And do you feel that this storytelling will help penetrate readers into taking action?
That's a very good question. A writer that Aminatta and I both like is named Barry Lopez, who wrote a beautiful book about wolves, a book about the Arctic and the imagination. And he's spent decades of his life with indigenous elders all over the world, in Canada and the Arctic and North America, South America, Australia. And he tells a variety of stories, all of which have a similar point, which is that, you know, as a storyteller, you're not sort of a keeper of wisdom. You're kind of a container for it, you know, and that there's something mysterious about a story, the point of which the best ones is always just wake up, you know. And I have to say that in our current kind of media environment, we're not telling very good stories. We're not leaving room for complexity. And so I know this is kind of old fashioned. It's a book, it's made of paper, you can get it digitally. But I still believe very much in the fact that there are certain things that can only happen at a certain speed over a certain amount of time with a certain register of care and enchantment involved in them. And to me, that means, you know, a story in a book. And I hope that, you know, we have some control as people that raise families, that have friends, that live in communities, that are part of school systems, that, you know, we could start to make environmental education and questioning part of our everyday life, you know, not an also, you know. And so my hope is that a book like this, you know, or some other books like the one that Aminatta held up, that they can become more embedded in our daily life as compass points and you know, headlamps for the darkness that we face, because we are really going towards a serious crisis, and we know this. Everyone knows this. And yes, some people still have to wake up, but that's what a good story can do.
Exactly, and I find that it can be so unapproachable and so far-reaching that storytelling, like your book, helps engage us. It is enchanting, and yet it's also a compass, and it's approachable. I find often the news is so like breaking news, that it, with the climate crisis and the it's just like too much. So being able to get lost, you know, I read this in my hammock. You know, I'm out in nature under the trees, and I could put it down when it was uncomfortable and then pick it back up, and that's what's so great about books.
Yeah, they allow us to think and dream at the same time, you know. And how many stories do you read in which someone has a dream and something significant happens, versus a story in which someone watches the news and then they make a big decision about their life? It's usually the dream, you know.
Hide under rock. Or not even, like Curtis Sittenfeld wrote this book called Prep, and it's basically about nothing and everything at the same time in boarding school. And I remember being so moved by that. And yet, you know, I watched the debates last night and I'm like, I gotta go to bed. I don't want to think.
Book clubs. I love that you're doing this. I don't know, Aminatta, have you ever called into one like this?
I'm trying to think. No, I don't think I have, actually. I'm doing another one next week, which may be a little bit like it, but no, I don't think so. No, this is great. It's a very enjoyable conversation. I'm loving it.
I am
Yeah.
too. I'm so grateful and so honored. I'm just in awe of you guys. For me, the biggest thing is I want people to read. I feel like we're lacking that. There's so much instant, you know, gratification and so much that's fed at us all the time. And I found solace in books, and I want to get back to that. And I want to encourage people to get back to that. And also, I want people to understand what it takes to write a book. I mean, there's a lot, you know, I'm sure I've talked to some authors. I think it was Lisa Taddeo who was, you know, took for her forever to have a semicolon and have an argument with her editor. And, you know, I think that there's so much artistry that goes into it and thought to map out where your book's going. And I want people to understand that process. And it's having conversations like this with you guys and understanding your backgrounds and where you're coming from. And I think it's really important and a very needed conversation. So
Thank you also for having us, because this is sort of an unusual book in that it's written by 35 people. And, you know, most of the times in book clubs or in scenarios where you have someone on, it's not a collaborative book. It's usually, I mean, every book is made through a group of people, but usually it's one person wrote the book. And the author is there. And it's really, really nice of you to have Aminatta and I both on, because I've worked with her for 10 years, as I mentioned, as her editor, and I've learned to enjoy an immense array of things through following her mind, and having her next to some of my other favorite writers in this book, some of whom she knows and some of whom she doesn't. I just feel like it allows there to be a multiplicity of perspective about what the climate crisis feels like, and what's driving it, and what some possible solutions are, rather than one story, you know, a guru complex. Here's what you need to do, 5 steps.
Yeah.
You know, I wish climate change were like that, but it's not.
John is the master of the anthology. And I think that the wonderful thing about being a contributor to an anthology is, you know, you can write what you like, you know, within the theme. And John will say to me, I'm doing this or that story, or sometimes I just show, I mean, the Bruno story, I just wrote because I wanted to write it. It seemed such a compelling story to tell. And I was recovering from a surgery. And I just thought, well, it's not much I can do, so I'll just write the story because I just think it needs to be told. And I showed it to John just as a friend. And he said to me, you know, actually, this would fit really well into something I'm doing. So you know, the freedom of the space, but the different forms that you find in these anthologies, and what it does to your mind when you read it, you know, even though it all circles around a shared theme, the fact of having these different forms expands and refreshes and oxygenates different parts of your mind in a way that, you know, love the single story as I do, you know, the full-length novel. Full-length novel never really quite does what an anthology does.
Well, and that's what's so great is that all the different perspectives, and this is such a heavy topic. I mean, all the topics that you really have written about in the Tales of Two, you know, Planet Cities, there's such heavy topics that in order to really cover the basis, you really need to have a lot of different perspectives and writers and narratives, so that I think maybe people can grab onto that and understand that. And with that being said, we have quite a few questions. Do you have time to answer just a couple of questions from the viewers?
Sure.
Okay, hang on one sec. Okay, so someone's bringing up the debates last night. They said, I have watched the VP debate last night, and something came to mind in connection to Tales of Two Planets. Climate change is one of the focus points, as it should be, since it is very important and crucial to our survival as human beings. And I was wondering, what is your professional opinion on how our political system addresses environmentalism more in the future?
I'd be curious to have your take on this, Aminatta, because you have lived your time between several countries, but I'll give mine very briefly, which is, I think we've done a very poor job of it so far. And, you know, one thing I want to add to making an anthology is that it allows you to not see the issue of the climate crisis only in the context of what it means, say, for business, which is how often climate change was discussed within the political arena, as in you could talk about it, but as long as you didn't threaten the right of business to continue to expand at the rate it has been expanding, for the last 40 years. And when you put the climate crisis in the context of an escaped ape in a country far from here, and what that means for people that live in Sierra Leone, you suddenly tilt the whole equation. And I think we need to come up with a much vaster program than any that we've been confronted with, because the climate crisis, it affects people's health, it affects national security, it affects food supply, it affects happiness, it affects the stories we tell. We're looking at a dying off of millions of species, which David Attenborough has made a documentary about. It affects our spiritual life. So I think we need to come up with a really big idea. And I'm not saying that it's the Green New Deal, but it has to come up with something more than incremental change, because we're at a rate of increase in temperature that's going to make almost unsustainable changes to our environment that if we allow it to keep continuing, I don't know, you and I will be in a vaporetto in a underwater Miami or somewhere instead of in our lovely dry apartments. But I mean, what do you think about, you've lived in England and Sierra Leone and Iran and other places?
Yeah, I think, I mean, I don't want to bash America. Having said that, I'm going to bash America.
Go for it.
So, coming here to live, the thing that is most shocking to my family is the derision with which aspects of environmental concern are treated. So that tension between economic growth and consumption and protecting the environment exists everywhere I've ever been. But I've never been anywhere where it is treated with scorn by some people and laughed at by some people. And also is really a relatively low priority. So we've talked about recycling, and my view of recycling is teach good habits, right? It won't get us through this, but we may as well all start learning good habits. And one of the things that my husband and I are just so shocked at is the use of plastic bags. I just can't get over the way in which everything is put into multiple plastic bags. And I go to the supermarket and I'm always trying to get my plastic bag into the hand of the teller before she starts. He starts. Stop it. But I will tell, I'd also, so one of the good things about living in the DC area is that one has access to quite good information because a lot of people here are at the heart of government. And play dates can produce unexpected results. So I don't involve myself in the play dates too often. That is my husband's job. But one day he said to me, you might want to be here when so-and-so picks up her son, because, and he told me who she was and what her job was, and it was a key job in environmental policy, in the not in the administration, but in the civil service. So when she came, I said to her, after I said, would you like a glass of wine? Because I planned to keep her. And then, would you like another? I said, you know, you must get this all the time, but can I ask you one question, just one question? And she said, you can ask me anything you like. And I said, why do so many people think in America, I may know it's elsewhere, but it's very key here. Why do hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people think that all the scientists in the whole world over decades got together to construct this great big conspiracy, right? Why would they do that? And her answer essentially was, that's the cover story. She said, she's never met a single person in business or in industry or in anything who doesn't think that climate change is real. She said, what they are doing, and I said, oh, she said two things, right? First of all, they think that climate change, any acknowledgement of it will bring in a liberal agenda, right? They'll have to agree to all kinds of things, like making public schools better. But the other thing was, she said, they know it, and they're just, and I said, they're looting the bar while the Titanic sinks, aren't they? And she said, yeah, that's what they're doing. So, you know, I think it's very important to know when people are lying to you, and the people who think that climate change is a fantasy cooked up by, you know, many thousands of scientists over several decades. I mean, I was learning about climate change when I was at school, for goodness sake, and that's a long time ago. So, this is not a conspiracy that has got, you know, the idea that it's a conspiracy just simply can't hold water. And then they know that, and we should call them on it.
I'm there with you. I feel like I could talk to you guys all day. I feel like I'm eating up all your time, but I feel like I just love this conversation, and I love learning from both of you. I'm going to quickly wrap up, but I want to ask really fast, what are your next projects that you're working on?
I'm working on a book about the environment. What else? I'm actually going back to nonfiction, and it's set in on the African continent, which of course is dear to my heart, and one that I've spent a lot of time writing and thinking about. So it's about the environment, but it's focused over there.
About the conspiracy?
Yeah, exactly. I uncover a vast conspiracy at the heart of liberal thinking. Yeah.
How about you, John?
I just finished a new book of poems, which is called Wind Trees, which is trying to think around how to write myself into the world, but without putting myself at the center of it, and thinking about all the things that have traveled by wind and all the things that trees know that we don't. And I'm also just finishing an anthology tentatively called Letters Home, which has been publishing in a website I work on called Literary Hub. It's a series of essays from writers around the country thinking aloud about their feelings about what this country has become and what it has been in the wake of the death of George Floyd, and some of the feelings that intersect with that as a result of the lack of a space to mourn during COVID. And I think hopefully the anthology will be a place to do that, to assert frustration, a time to mourn, but also just carve out little spaces of joy that the writers are doing in spite of what has been a truly bonkers and catastrophic year.
Bonkers is a great word for it.
Yeah.
I feel so fed. I can't even tell you. I feel very, very lucky to be able to sit here and talk with you both. And I mean, first of all, to be able to read your work and to now have this conversation. And I cannot wait to get my hands on your next projects. So.
Well, thank you so much for having us.
Yes, thank you very much indeed. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Yeah, it feels like you've had a salon here, and we've just been sitting surrounded by 8 chickens and some extremely knowledgeably well-fed children.
Come on over anytime for dinner.
I would like that. Thank you. I love Austin.
Yeah.
Perfect. Come. We have some great wine and some good eggs and some... Thank you again, you guys. I so appreciate it. It's such a pleasure.
All right. Well, I guess we should say goodbye. Thanks for having us. Have a great evening, everybody.
Thank you.
Or afternoon, depending on where you are.
Bye.
Bye-bye.